Clement is here looking at the British papers today, or the international papers, but we're starting off with the British ones. They've been looking into the background, really, haven't they, Clement, of the attacker in Manchester?
That's right. Well, we know that the attacker was 22, that he was born in Manchester, and as The Guardian puts it, his profile fits those of previous terrorists. He's young, he was born to Libyan parents. Like other terrorists, he was involved in gangs and drugs as a teenager. If you remember, one of the brothers who bombed the Boston Marathon in 2013 was a college dropout who made ends meet by dealing cannabis.
And some of these attackers, of course, or all of these attackers really have one thing in common, that they've been radicalised. And some of the papers are asking why people are turning to these extremes.
That's right. There's an interesting piece in The Independent this morning by a lecturer in Islamic studies. She says that rather than focusing on individuals, we need to investigate the structures that generate violent groups. For instance, she says that high levels of poverty and discrimination lead to high levels of radicalisation. We also need to look at the underlying ideology, she says. People who carry out attacks are fighting for what they think is a better world. In other words, we need to take into account this yearning for justice, while at the same time promoting diversity and plurality.
Now, so far, Theresa May's response has been to beef up security, that critical level on the security threat, urging Britons as well to actually avoid crowded areas.
That's right, and one of the new measures she's taken so far has been to put more armed police on the streets. As you can see here on the front page of The Times, 1,000 extra police officers have been deployed across the UK, and up to 5,000 soldiers could be sent to transport hubs and other crowded public places.
Not everyone seems to think it's a good idea, though.
That's right. There's an interesting cartoon this morning in the Daily Telegraph. You can see the traditional changing of the guard here outside Buckingham Palace, except that here the Queen's Guard has been replaced by a soldier, and the tourists are not amused.
And Theresa May's come under quite a lot of criticism, hasn't she, for her anti-terror strategy now?
Well, that's right. The Independent writes this morning that while Theresa May cuts a reassuring figure, her tough stance on terrorism and radicalisation risks alienating British Muslims, many of whom feel spied on, The Independent argues. The newspaper says that the top priority for Theresa May should be to win the trust of the Muslim community, for example, by ensuring a much tougher response to hate speech and hate crimes, this to show that Britain is united in the face of terrorism.
Now, that attack in Manchester is likely to take centre stage today. That as the US President Donald Trump meets NATO leaders, of course, in Brussels for the first time since his election.
Well, that's right. The New York Times published on Wednesday a series of photographs taken at the scene of the attack in Manchester that appear to come from the US intelligence services. These include photos of an explosive device, and British police fear that this could complicate the investigation.
Now, let's be honest, Clement. I mean, Donald Trump, he's met with quite a lot of scepticism, hasn't he, from other European leaders. I mean, what can we actually expect from this NATO meeting today?
Well, as the Huffington Post puts it, Donald Trump has come to Brussels, but which Donald Trump? That we don't know. The US president has been very critical of NATO in the past, calling it obsolete and urging European leaders to take defence into their own hands. But he said as recently as last week that he was... that the main goal of his first trip abroad was to strengthen old friendships and seeking new partners.
I mean, there have been some irreconcilable differences, really, haven't there, between Trump and some European leaders?
That's right. German paper Der Spiegel is very sceptical this morning, reminding us that Trump and other NATO heads of state disagree on many issues, immigration, climate change and trade policy, among others, but they may not even have time to get to those issues. Donald Trump is expected to see the EU Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker, but their meeting should last less than 30 minutes.
OK, well, Donald Trump isn't the only new kid on the block, if you like. He's also got a meeting with Emmanuel Macron, who's there for the first time as well. Can they get on, perhaps?
Well, that's right. Macron and Trump don't seem to have a lot in common. They disagree on many issues and have completely different visions of the world. But there's no reason why they should not be able to work together, Newsweek suggests. And if if they ever get stuck for conversation, they can perhaps turn to philosophy, Newsweek suggests. Emmanuel Macron worked as an assistant to French philosopher Paul Ricoeur, as you may know, not so different from Trump, actually, who wrote in his famous book, The Art of the Deal, if you're going to be thinking anyway, you might as well think big.
Very nicely put. A real meeting of minds.
That's right. Both lovers of philosophy.
Exactly. OK, we shall see how it goes. Coverage of that summit, of course, during the day here on France 24. Thanks to Clement, thanks to Stephen as well.